Emily arrived in the heart of Laos looking for peace, but instead, she found silence. A whole village that didn't see her, didn't hear her, didn't acknowledge she was even there. She thought it was a mistake. Then she saw her sister's name carved in stone, thousands of miles from home. Now, trapped between past and present, Emily has to face the truth that no one prepares you for. What if you're the ghost in someone else's story? Emily had been traveling through Southeast Asia for 3 months, her backpack sun-bleached and covered in patches from all the countries she had wandered through. Laos was her final stop, a place she chose not for the temples or the rivers, but because no one back home talked much about it. It felt like the perfect place to disappear for a while. She had taken a local bus into the hills of Luang Prabang province and then hiked into the jungle, guided only by an old map she bought from a street vendor. Her goal was simple: wander off-grid and find herself again. After a night under the stars and a morning of climbing through dense undergrowth, she stumbled upon a village that wasn't on any map. It was tucked between 2 hills, surrounded by thick bamboo and banana trees. The houses were built from weathered teak wood, and faded orange paper lanterns hung from every roof like forgotten memories. She stepped into the clearing, relieved to see signs of life. There were people, children playing in the dirt, elders sitting on stools weaving, women pounding herbs in large stone bowls. But the moment she walked through the invisible threshold of the village, something felt wrong. No one looked up. No one stopped what they were doing. No smiles. No greetings. Emily cleared her throat, stepped forward, and waved. Nothing. She called out a soft Sabedi, the only Lao word she had practiced. Still nothing. A dog trotted past her and didn't sniff, didn't bark, just passed like she wasn't there. It wasn't rudeness. It wasn't confusion. It was as if she didn't exist. At first, she assumed it was a language barrier. Maybe they were shy, or maybe outsiders weren't welcome. But when she walked directly into a group of kids playing, they parted without looking up, like wind around a stone. It chilled her. She stood in the center of the village, arms raised like she was directing a symphony only she could hear, trying to get any kind of reaction. Nothing came. No acknowledgement. The only sound was the crackling of a fire pit and the occasional thump of wood being chopped. Her voice echoed back to her from the forest, unanswered. The village was real. The people were real. But she might as well have been made of air. She sat on a low wooden bench in the town center, eyes scanning the villagers as they passed by. She thought she saw one old man glance at her, but when she turned to meet his gaze, he was already looking away. Her breath quickened. Her skin prickled. She wasn't scared yet, just confused. But confusion can fester into fear when it stretches for too long. She got up and walked to a small roadside stall that sold handmade scarves. Beautiful ones, dyed indigo and embroidered with golden threads. She picked one up, held it high, trying to catch the merchant's attention. The woman never even blinked. Emily took out money, waved it in the air, and gently placed the bills on the table next to the scarf. Still nothing. The woman simply walked away, leaving the scarf and the money untouched. As if the entire interaction hadn't happened. Emily wandered to the edge of the village, hoping to find someone, anyone, who might explain what was going on. But the village was sealed by the jungle. No paths in or out beyond the one she came from. And that path had started to look different. Vines she didn't remember. A clearing that had shrunk. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, and with every minute, her heart started to pound a little harder. She wasn't just being ignored. She was being erased. She ran her hand along the bark of a tree just outside the last hut and whispered to herself, "What is this place?" That night, she pitched her tent near the edge of the village. She didn't want to intrude further but didn't know where else to go. As the sun sank, the village lit up, not from electric lights, but from hundreds of candles placed methodically along the paths, in windows, at doorways. A quiet ritual, performed in silence. The people moved gracefully, with purpose, but still, no one acknowledged her presence. They stepped around her tent like it was a rock in a stream. She tried to take a video on her phone, to show someone later, but the screen showed static, glitching like an old VHS tape. The audio was nothing but a low hum. She deleted it, thinking it must be a bug. But then the battery drained from 70% to 0% in seconds. Her tech was dying just like her logic. As night deepened, drums began to sound in the hills. Slow, heavy, measured. A rhythm like a heartbeat. She stepped out of her tent, drawn by the sound, and saw villagers gathering near the main square. They carried baskets and cloth, masks and torches. She watched from a distance, afraid to interfere but desperate to understand. She whispered a prayer to her sister, a habit she'd picked up since the funeral, and felt a sudden warmth on her neck. Turning around, she saw nothing. But something had changed. One of the candles behind her had gone out. Just that one. The rest burned brightly. Emily didn't sleep much that night. The candlelight rituals and the humming drums kept echoing in her ears long after the village had gone still. She lay curled up in her sleeping bag, eyes wide open, staring at the top of her tent like it might collapse inward at any moment. Her body was still, but her mind was spinning. Who were these people? Why couldn't they see her? And more terrifying, what if they could, but were choosing not to? The silence pressed against her like a second skin. Morning came, but it brought no answers. She emerged from the tent slowly, stretching her limbs like someone waking up from a dream she didn't want to return to. The village was alive again, people moving, working, children playing. But still no one looked at her. It wasn't just unsettling anymore. It was deeply personal. She began to feel like she'd been judged and found guilty of something, even though she didn't know what. That's when her thoughts returned to her sister. Her name was Lila. Just 19 when she died. Emily had been in New York that day, stuck in a meeting, her phone on silent while Lila had tried to call 3 times. When Emily finally saw the missed calls, it was too late. Lila had lost control of her car on a rainy highway. The ambulance arrived quickly, but not quickly enough. For months after, Emily couldn't stop imagining what those last moments must have been like. Did Lila know she was dying? Was she scared? Did she feel abandoned? Guilt had planted itself deep in Emily's chest and refused to let go. Therapy hadn't helped. Neither had time. This trip had been her last attempt to escape the heaviness, to find a way to forgive herself. But standing in this village, surrounded by people who acted like she didn't exist, the guilt started morphing into something else, something sharper. It felt like punishment. Like she had wandered into a space where the rules were different, where pain had weight and silence had voice. She walked to the stream just beyond the village edge and washed her face, hoping the cold water might clear her thoughts. Her reflection in the water looked unfamiliar. Tired eyes, hair tangled from the jungle, skin slightly pale. She whispered her sister's name again, as she had done every morning since the funeral, but this time the name echoed oddly off the trees. It came back not once, but twice, like a voice imitating her. She turned sharply, expecting to see someone behind her. But there was no one. Only the trees. Only the wind. She closed her eyes and pressed her hands to her face. When she opened them again, she saw something that made her blood freeze. A line of tiny paper boats was floating down the stream. Each one had a name written on it. Names she didn't recognize. All but one, Lila. In bold black ink, centered on the smallest boat, slowly drifting by. She jumped into the water, grabbed the boat, and held it in shaking hands. It was handmade from the same kind of paper that lined the lanterns in the village. The corners were damp, ink beginning to smudge, but the name was still clear. Lila. She ran back into the village, holding the boat up, calling out, "Who did this? Why is my sister's name on this?" Her voice cracked, but no one looked up. The villagers kept weaving, cooking, sweeping. One woman walked right past her, brushing against her shoulder but not reacting at all. Emily was losing control. She screamed. She begged. She dropped to her knees in the dirt and sobbed. The paper boat crumpled in her hand. She clutched it to her chest like it could anchor her to reality. But still, the silence answered her. That kind of silence that feels intentional, that feels like judgment. Her breathing slowed. She sat there for what felt like an hour, then 2. No one spoke to her. No one offered a hand. She began to realize that this village wasn't going to give her answers easily. If she wanted the truth, she would have to find it herself. By late afternoon, she walked to the outskirts of the village again, this time following a narrow path that led into a thick patch of trees. Something was pulling her there, not a sound, not a sign, just a deep feeling in her gut. The air felt colder under the canopy, the light dimmer even though the sun was still up. She walked slowly, each step sinking into the soft earth. Then she saw it, a shrine, nestled between two trees. Small, made of stone and wood, covered in vines. On the shrine was a single candle, still burning, despite the breeze. And beside it, a framed photo. Emily's breath caught. It was a picture of her and Lila, taken 2 summers ago on a hiking trip. One they had posted online. But this photo had been printed, framed, and placed here, on the other side of the world. She stepped back in horror. How could this be? Who had brought it here? Why? She picked up the frame with trembling hands, turning it over, hoping for a clue. There was something etched into the back in Laos script. She took a photo with her phone, then opened her translation app. It took a minute to process, but the message made her knees buckle. It read, "She called. You didn't answer. But she forgives you." Emily sat down, stunned. The jungle around her was quiet again. No insects, no birds. Just stillness. It felt like the world had paused, waiting to see what she would do next. She clutched the frame and whispered through tears, "I'm sorry, Lila. I'm so sorry." A breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves above her head. For a moment, she thought she heard a voice on the wind. Just a whisper. Just a breath. But it sounded like Lila's laugh. Light. Forgiving. Gone before she could be sure. The next morning, Emily awoke to a strange sound, a soft, rhythmic thumping like drums being beaten far off in the hills. The early sun painted the village in gold, but something was different. The usual silence was now mixed with distant chanting, a low hum carried on the breeze. She stepped out of her tent and saw villagers moving with more purpose than before. They were gathering decorations, unfolding colored fabrics, stringing banners between poles. Wooden masks with exaggerated faces, some smiling, some weeping, were being set up on stands. Children carried baskets of petals and candles. Something was about to happen. A festival. But no one had told her. No one had looked her way. Still, she followed them, unable to ignore the deep sense of something building, something sacred. The villagers were assembling in the center of the square, arranging mats and small tables stacked with fruits, incense, and bowls of rice. Dancers appeared, their faces hidden behind those eerie masks, their hands moving in slow, precise gestures. No music played. No one spoke. But the ritual had begun. Emily stood at the edge of the square, completely unnoticed, yet fully surrounded. A man in a crimson robe began a slow chant that echoed off the buildings. The villagers joined in, the tones rising and falling like waves. The dancers moved in a circle, weaving in and out, their movements hypnotic. It was beautiful. And terrifying. She raised her phone to record, needing proof this was real. But the moment she hit the record button, the screen turned black. No sound. No image. Just a blank, flickering display. She tried again. Same result. Confused, she flipped the camera to take a photo. The picture captured nothing but the empty square, no people, no masks, no colors. Just the wooden floor and the breeze-blown leaves. Her hands shook. She lowered the phone and looked again. The square was full. The ritual was still happening. It was as if whatever this was, it couldn't be documented. Or maybe it wouldn't let itself be seen that way. She backed away slowly, unsure whether she was intruding or being tested. Then she noticed something. The dancers were now moving in a tighter circle, closing in around a central object. A platform. On it sat a single white candle. The flame was still and strong, untouched by the wind. Emily squinted. There was something behind the candle, a piece of cloth, draped like a curtain. As the dancers stepped aside, one woman lifted the cloth. Behind it was a portrait. Her breath caught. It was Lila again. A different photo this time. One she had never shared, never posted online. It was taken years ago, in their childhood bedroom, when Lila had just turned 10. Her hair was in pigtails, and she was holding a stuffed elephant. Emily recognized it instantly. It used to sit on their shared bookshelf. Her knees felt weak. She had never uploaded that photo. It was never supposed to leave their family's home. She stumbled forward, shouting now. How do you have that picture? Who gave it to you? Who are you? But again, no one turned. No one acknowledged her. The chants continued. The masked dancers began moving again, this time faster, their arms slicing the air. The masks twisted and turned, creating shadows that danced along the walls of the huts. The energy was changing. It wasn't calm anymore. It was urgent, like the whole village was part of something Emily couldn't understand, something that was reaching its peak. She looked around and realized every single villager had closed their eyes. All of them. In perfect unison. Except one. A child near the back, no older than 7, was staring directly at her. No mask. No chanting. Just wide eyes locked onto Emily's face. The girl didn't blink. Her lips didn't move. But her eyes, those eyes were filled with something ancient, something knowing. Emily took a step toward her. The girl held up a small clay object in her palm and slowly placed it on the ground. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Emily ran to the spot and picked it up. It was a tiny figure, shaped like a woman kneeling. She turned it over. Her own name was carved underneath. Her full name. First and last. The way it would appear on a gravestone. Suddenly, the drums stopped. The chanting stopped. The dancers froze in place. The whole village fell still. Then, one by one, the villagers opened their eyes. Every single one of them turned toward the center of the square. Not toward Emily. Toward the photo of Lila. And then, in complete silence, they bowed. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Her body was frozen in place, her hands trembling as she clutched the small clay figure. When she finally managed to step backward, something caught her eye. On the edge of the square, behind the dancers, there was a single hut that no one had gone near all day. Its windows were shuttered, its door painted black. And carved into the door, barely visible in the fading light, was the same symbol that was once embroidered on Lila's childhood blanket. Emily didn't know what to believe anymore. She had come to this country looking for peace. But peace doesn't follow you. It waits for you to earn it. And whatever this village was, it wasn't just a place. It was an experience. A mirror. A test. The festival ended without warning. The villagers dispersed silently, returning to their chores as if nothing had happened. Emily stood alone in the square, her fingers still gripping the clay figure with her name etched underneath. She was no longer just a tourist. She was a part of whatever this was now. And the next step was clear. She had to enter the black hut. The one place no one dared go. The place that called to her like a whisper in a storm. Emily stood before the black-painted hut as dusk spread its shadow over the village, her breath shallow and heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The door was narrow and crooked, the wood warped from years of rain and sun. Ivy had crept up one side, clinging like silent fingers trying to hold it shut. She had seen villagers walk around it, never even glancing in its direction, as though it didn't exist. No footsteps led to it, no signs of life around it. The space in front of the door was bare, like even nature had decided to stay away. Emily didn't know what she was expecting, but something deep inside her told her that whatever was behind that door was going to change everything. She reached for the rusted latch, her hand shaking slightly, and with one small push, it creaked open with a groan that echoed down her spine. The air inside was thick and heavy, like it hadn't moved in years. Dust floated in thin beams of fading light, and the scent was a mix of old wood, dried herbs, and something metallic, like blood that had dried a long time ago. The hut was small and dimly lit by a single candle sitting on a low table in the center. Shadows clung to the corners like silent watchers. As Emily stepped inside, she noticed the floor was covered in faded drawings. Hundreds of them. Some on paper, some scratched directly into the wood. Faces. Figures. Most were unfamiliar, but some she recognized. Herself, standing alone. Her sister, smiling wide. One image showed both of them as children, holding hands, but their eyes were scratched out. Another showed Emily curled in a fetal position, with large hands surrounding her like a cage. She knelt down to look closer and saw tiny writing circling the images. Not in Lao, but in English. Sentences that looked like they had been scribbled in panic. She didn't answer. She wasn't there. You left her. She staggered back, tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to scream, to tear the drawings off the walls and burn them. But she didn't move. She just stood there, frozen by a terrible realization. This place knew her. Knew what haunted her. Knew what she had been running from. Her eyes drifted to the far side of the hut where an altar stood. It was small, made of stone, covered in dried flower petals and candles that had burned down to nubs. On the altar sat a locket. The kind her sister used to wear. Emily moved toward it, her steps slow, as if crossing some invisible barrier. She picked up the locket and opened it. Inside was a photo of her and Lila, taken at a county fair years ago. They were smiling, faces sunburnt, arms around each other. She remembered that day so clearly, the warmth of the sun, the sound of music, the taste of cotton candy. It hit her like a punch to the chest. How could this be here? It had been buried with her sister. Her knees buckled and she sat on the floor, clutching the locket. Her eyes scanned the altar again. Behind it was a wall covered in names, written in red ink. She didn't recognize most of them, but two stood out. Lila Carter. Emily Carter. Her name was at the bottom, unfinished, as if someone had started writing it but hadn't completed the final letters. Next to it was a blank space. A date half-carved. Her birth date. But the year of death was missing. Her fingers brushed over the edge of the carving, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to hum. A soft vibration in the walls, the floor, the air itself. It was like the village was breathing. Like it knew she was there. She stood up, staring at the half-written name. Then she heard a noise behind her. A soft creak. She spun around. The door was closing by itself. Slowly. Quietly. No wind. No hands. Just movement. As if it had decided she was supposed to stay. Panic surged through her. She rushed to the door, yanked it open, and stumbled outside. But the village had changed. The sky had turned grey, though the sun had not yet set. The huts looked older, more decayed. Some had collapsed. The air was colder. And the villagers were gone. The paths were empty. No sound. No movement. It was like the entire place had shifted into another layer of reality. A forgotten version. A memory. Or something even older than memory. She called out, voice breaking, but there was no answer. Not even the wind replied. She turned around, staring at the hut that had held her name. The door was closed again, sealed without a latch. It looked untouched, like she had never been inside. She wandered the village in growing dread, trying to find someone, anything familiar. But the place was empty now, except for one sound, the faint jingling of bells. Tiny bells, like those tied around a child's wrist. She followed the sound to the edge of the forest, where the little girl she had seen during the festival stood waiting. Still silent. Still watching. Emily approached slowly, trembling. The girl pointed to the jungle path Emily had used when she first arrived. But now, the path looked different. It wasn't overgrown. It was clean. Swept. Inviting. Like it had been prepared for her. The girl stepped aside, never saying a word, and Emily understood. She had to go. Whatever this place was, whatever message it had delivered, it had finished with her. But as she stepped onto the path, she turned to ask the girl one final question. Why me? The girl tilted her head. Then, for the first time, she spoke. Just 2 words. She called. Emily's breath caught. Her knees gave way. But when she looked up again, the girl was gone. Vanished into the fog. The village behind her began to blur, the outlines of the huts dissolving like smoke. Emily clutched the locket and stepped forward, the jungle swallowing her whole. Behind her, the bell jingled once more. Then silence. Emily followed the narrow path into the jungle, but something about the trees, the light, even the smell of the air felt unfamiliar. The ground beneath her feet was solid, yet every step echoed like she was walking through a memory instead of a forest. She didn't know how long she walked, but time stopped feeling real. Minutes stretched like hours, and she couldn't tell if it was morning or dusk anymore. The locket she clutched in her hand had grown warm, almost pulsing, like a heartbeat. She stopped when she noticed something just beyond a curtain of vines, a stone well surrounded by broken statues and moss-covered stones. A faint sound echoed up from its depths, something that wasn't wind or water. She stepped closer, peered down into the darkness, and heard it again. A voice. Faint. Familiar. It was calling her name. She dropped to her knees, trying to make out the sound. The echo came again, louder now. Emily. It was Lila's voice. Clear. Calm. Impossible. Her breath caught in her throat as she leaned in closer. Without thinking, she reached toward the edge and touched the rim. The moment her fingers made contact, the vines behind her shifted, parting on their own. Behind them stood an opening. A doorway. Carved into a hillside and framed by crumbling stone. She didn't hesitate. Something in her told her this was what the entire journey had been leading to. She stepped inside and found herself in a tunnel. Cold, dark, narrow. The walls were damp and carved with strange markings, symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the darkness. She moved forward slowly, the only sound her breath and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. The tunnel seemed endless, but eventually it opened into a chamber. It was circular, the ceiling low, lit by dozens of candles placed in perfect symmetry. In the center sat a figure, cloaked in red, face hidden beneath a hood. Emily froze. The figure raised its head but didn't speak. Instead, it motioned for her to sit. She lowered herself onto a stone slab across from it, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear her own thoughts. The figure finally spoke, and the voice was neither male nor female, just ancient and steady. You have been walking with ghosts, Emily Carter. The words wrapped around her like a fog. You were called here because you do not forgive yourself. This village, this silence, this trial, it is not punishment. It is your reflection. She didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened as she tried to understand. Why here? She whispered. Why now? The figure turned its head slightly. Because time runs thin, it said. Then it stood and pointed toward the wall behind her. Emily turned. A mirror was mounted there, old, cracked, but somehow glowing. As she stepped closer, she didn't see her reflection. She saw herself in a hospital bed, wires connected to her arms, machines beeping slowly. A man stood beside the bed, holding her hand. A nurse adjusted a monitor. Emily's body lay still. Her eyes were closed. Pale. Silent. You are not awake, the figure said behind her. You are in between. Between memory and awakening. Between guilt and peace. She turned back, mind spinning. So I'm in a coma. The figure nodded. Your body sleeps, but your soul wandered to where the truth waits. She dropped to her knees. And Lila? Her voice cracked. Is she here? The figure didn't answer with words. Instead, it stepped aside and waved its arm toward the candlelit space. One flame flared brighter than the others, and from its glow, Lila appeared. Not a ghost. Not a memory. But a presence. Soft and warm and real. Emily ran to her, arms outstretched, tears falling freely. Lila didn't speak. She simply smiled and pulled Emily into a hug. It was the first time since the accident that Emily had felt whole. Lila looked into her eyes and said one thing. It's not your fault. The chamber seemed to sigh as she said it. Like the walls had been holding their breath all this time. Emily sobbed into her sister's shoulder, every bit of guilt melting into the floor. When she looked up, the figure was gone. So were the candles. So was the tunnel. It was just her and Lila in the stillness. But then, Lila began to fade. Slowly. Gently. She stepped back, smiled again, and whispered, You can go home now. And just like that, the light disappeared. Emily opened her eyes to the sound of beeping. A ceiling fan spun lazily above her. The smell of antiseptic filled her nose. A nurse gasped and rushed from the room. Moments later, a doctor ran in, followed by a man, her boyfriend, Jacob, his eyes wide with disbelief and relief. Emily, he said, choking on emotion. You're back. she tried to speak but couldn't. Instead, tears rolled down her cheeks. She reached for the locket still around her neck. It was warm, real. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but clear. "Lila, she forgave me." Jacob looked confused, but he nodded. "You were out for 3 weeks," he whispered. "We didn't know if you'd come back." Emily looked out the window. The sky was bright, the clouds drifting like nothing had changed. But she had. Somewhere deep in Laos, a village existed, or didn't, that had given her back her soul. She knew she'd never be able to explain what happened. She also knew she didn't need to. Some journeys are meant to be lived in silence. Like the village. Like forgiveness. Like love that doesn't vanish, even in death. The hospital room was quiet, except for the rhythmic beep of the monitor and the low hum of machines. Emily lay still, her eyes fluttering open for the first time in weeks. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but steady, and a nurse by her bedside froze in shock. Then, in a flash of movement, she pressed the emergency button and called out to the doctors down the hall. Moments later, the door burst open and a flurry of white coats surrounded her, checking her vitals, adjusting the machines, asking her to blink, to squeeze a hand, to move her fingers. She could barely speak, but her mind was awake, and her heart felt lighter. Jacob, her boyfriend, burst into the room seconds after, breathless and wide-eyed. "Emily," he whispered, his voice cracking, "you're really here." She wanted to tell him everything. About the village. The people. The masked dancers. The black-painted hut. But most of all, about Lila. She reached up slowly, her hand trembling as she touched the locket still hanging around her neck. It was warm, just like it had been in that place. No one had placed it there. It had never left her. It was proof that it wasn't just a dream. Her mouth was dry, but her voice finally came. "She forgave me." Jacob leaned in, confused. "Who?" Emily looked him in the eyes and said the name like it was both an answer and a prayer. "Lila." The room felt colder for a moment, as if the memory of her sister passed through the air. But then warmth returned. Doctors began explaining what had happened. 3 weeks ago, Emily had been found unconscious at the edge of a trail near a remote Laotian village. Dehydrated. Weak. No external injuries. Locals had found her, brought her to a small clinic, and she was later airlifted to Vientiane. She had been unresponsive ever since. Jacob told her they hadn't known if she'd wake up. As she lay in the hospital bed, Emily listened, but her mind wandered back to the village. To the silent people who never looked at her. To the sound of the drums. To the photo of Lila on the altar. It was all too real to be imagined. But how could she explain it? Would anyone believe her? Maybe it didn't matter. Some experiences weren't meant to be understood, only felt. Days passed, and Emily grew stronger. She walked slowly, talked quietly, and spent long moments by the hospital window, staring at the horizon. Her doctors said it was a miracle she had survived. That she must have a strong will to live. But Emily knew it wasn't about will. It was about grace. One morning, as the sun rose over the city, she heard something. Faint. Familiar. A whisper. Right by her ear. It wasn't a dream. It was clear. Soft. Loving. "It's not your fault. Go home." Emily turned quickly, but no one was there. Just the breeze blowing in from the open window. Tears welled in her eyes. She clutched the locket again. She knew that voice. It was Lila. One last goodbye. Not a haunting, but a release. Her sister had given her what she couldn't give herself. Permission to live again. She left the hospital a week later. Quietly. No big declarations. No press. Just a single backpack and a return ticket to New York. But this time, she didn't feel like she was running. She was returning with a purpose. A weight had lifted. A shadow had passed. She was no longer searching for forgiveness. She had found it in a place that didn't exist on any map. A village where people didn't speak, because they didn't need to. Where silence said everything. Back in New York, Emily kept her promise to Lila without ever having spoken it aloud. She started volunteering at a center for grieving families. Not to teach. Just to listen. To sit beside others who carried guilt and grief and didn't know what to do with it. She never told them her story. Never mentioned the village. But she looked at each of them with the same eyes that little girl in the village had used, full of quiet understanding. She still had dreams, though. Not every night. But some. Dreams of candles and songs and a forest path that only opened when you stopped trying to find it. Sometimes, she heard the drums. Sometimes, the whispers. But always, she woke up with peace. One morning, as she walked through Central Park, she saw a little girl sitting on a bench, holding a paper boat in her hand. The kind Lila's name had floated on. The girl looked up and smiled. Emily smiled back. And for a moment, the air felt like Laos again. Soft. Still. Timeless. She didn't need to ask questions anymore. Some things were better left unsaid. Like what really happened in that village. Or how long she had truly been there. Or why no one had ever seen it before or since. All she knew was that she had gone somewhere that touched the space between life and loss. And came back not with answers, but with peace. And that was enough.